Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Welcome in to a playoff edition of Daily Faceoff Live, brought to you by Bet365, our sports betting partner for the 2024 playoffs. We'll be here with Bet365 to give you all the news, analysis, lines, and betting options for the playoffs until just one team is left standing at the end of June. Tyler Yaremchuk and Frank Seravalli with you live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. And Frank, you do not root, you do not pick a side, but I would imagine you're happy to be done with the Pacific time zone at least. There's positives.
Yeah, I would say so. Lots of very early mornings out here out west. And although I very much enjoyed the last month that I spent in Vancouver, what a city, what a place, what a series this was. Yeah, it would be nice to head home for a change. So wrapping up in Vancouver today, and what a season for the Canucks.
What a season indeed for the Canucks. We're going to be joined by Jeff Paterson in a little bit for our big segment to do a debrief on everything that happened this season out in Vancouver. But let's start with Game 7 last night. Frank, the Edmonton Oilers survive another elimination game. It was the Canucks on home ice. And honestly, through 45 minutes, Frank, 45 minutes of game time, I was sitting there scratching my head going, this is really the effort that the Vancouver Canucks are putting forth with their season on the line in front of their home crowd. And then they turned on the Jets, and it felt like it was going to be a classic Canucks comeback for a bit.
Look, the Vancouver Canucks have had a ton of circus wins in these playoffs. That would have been the circiest of the circus wins that you ever saw. I mean, you can't show up to play for 6 minutes in an elimination game and think that you're going to win, yet the Oilers nearly folded. They nearly crumpled, and if you take a reverse angle look at that JT Miller shot from the slot that happened to hit Nikita Zadorov in the leg, we could be talking about a totally different story today, but we're not. And the reason why we're not is because the composure that the Oilers found. It was a timely timeout from Chris Knobloch, and then at the next television timeout, it was Darnell Nurse huddling the team around to send a message to the group to stay on their toes, to continue to be aggressive. And aggressive is exactly what the Oilers were from puck drop. They mauled the Canucks in just about every fashion possible. Shot attempts, shots, physicality. They were the team pushing, and if not for a 4-minute penalty kill that they had to close out the first period, which, by the way, gave Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl plenty of rest, the score could have probably been a lot more lopsided than it was. And look, that's a testament to this Edmonton team that a lot of weird things that happened in this series. You blew a 3-goal lead in game 1. You had to change goalies and go from Stu Skinner to Cal Pickard. You never led in this series once. You were down 1-0, 2-1, and 3-2. And yet, I loved what Chris Knobloch said after the game. He said, we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what could have been. What could we be talking about today? An abject failure of an Oilers season. Losing to a relatively or comparatively easy team in the Canucks, which they weren't an easy out by any stretch, but compared to Vegas or Colorado, I think everyone 10 out of 10 would agree that the Vancouver Canucks aren't built the same way. Yet the Oilers struggled with Vancouver all season long from start to finish, and they finished the season with a 4-7 record against Van in 11 games. 4-7. Yet they won the only 4 games that mattered. And they're moving on to the Final Four for the 3rd year in a row. They are Canada's last team standing. And Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, along with Evan Bouchard, by the way, first team in NHL history with 3 players with 20 or more points through round 2. That includes the insane scoring years of the 1980s. First team in NHL history that they have 3 players with 20 or more points. It's crazy to think about. They've got a real shot now against the Dallas Stars.
They do. We'll talk about that in just a second. Just quickly, Frank, before we move on and take a little early glance at the Western Conference final from the Vancouver perspective of this thing. And again, Jeff Paterson will be around in a bit to really dive deep into this. But what do you make of kind of the coming out flat performance in Game 7? Is it fair to say that maybe the Canucks just ran out of gas here in Game 7?
I also think, to use Rick Tockett's word, they were a little bit zapped by not having Brock Besser. I mean, you lose your playoff leading goal scorer and Oiler killer in Besser, who had 9 goals against the Oil in 10 games. It's tough. Secondary scoring was already hard to come by for them, and taking Besser out of their lineup just further highlighted the need for more guys to step up. And I also think there's something to be said of the moment. You've got an Oiler team that's been there before and has done it. You've got a Vancouver team that's experiencing it for the first time. That was, to me, a big advantage and experience that's what you end up seeing play out in Game 7.
Yeah, so the Oilers survive, and they are moving on to Dallas, Frank. Game 1 goes Thursday between these two sides, and when you go to take a first glance at this matchup, I think, obviously, it's the most difficult team the Oilers have ran into. For Dallas, I think, a big part for them, they've gotten a couple days off to rest now, and I think that could end up being a big advantage, especially when you consider the status of Rupe Hintz. But when you first look at this thing, Frank, what are some of the key battlegrounds? What are some of the storylines you're most intrigued by?
Depth, and depth. That's what the Dallas Stars are. And the Oilers are going to really need to find other players to score. They had way more hands on deck in the final 2 games of the series. They found even strength scoring. And even in Game 7, Dylan Holloway, great game. Ryan McLeod, way better game. Their fourth line was cooking at times. Janmark had an unbelievable game. You need to convert good games into goals on the score sheet, because the Dallas Stars have 2 first lines. They have 8 20-goal scorers. They have a defense core that is thinner in quantity but deeper in quality. And they also have the unquestioned best goalie in the series. So there's a lot of ground for the Oilers to try and make up, but very similarly to the Canucks, and I would say the Oilers have this advantage over every team that's left. Their ceiling of McDavid and Draisaitl, when they're on, is a level that, especially in the playoffs, Leon Draisaitl, the 4th fastest player ever to 100 career playoff points, they've got a level that I don't think any other team can get to. Can you get there? How many times can you get there? And how consistently can you get there? And what are you going to do for the rest of your team on nights when, or moments when, they don't have it?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and you talked about the depth. I also just think this Dallas team has the ability to negate Edmonton's biggest advantage. And again, that is the ability for 97 and 29 to produce, whether it's Ottinger standing tall, whether it's on the blue line, a guy like Miro Heiskanen, who can absolutely keep up with Connor McDavid and defend him off the rush. Or you look up front, you said it, they have 2 first lines, and then they have a hell of a third line and a hell of a fourth line. And that's just an area where Edmonton can't keep up. It's going to be a really interesting series. And while we're talking conference finals, Frank, I want to ask you an interesting question we got in the YouTube chat quickly, because there's been a lot of years in the NHL where the first round is like, boom, fireworks, unbelievable. And then it kind of tapers off a little bit. Teams get banged up. Maybe you get a team that goes on a miracle run that runs out of steam in the 3rd round, or even sometimes the cup final. But Corey asks, which remaining team is the most fraudulent? And I honestly don't think any of them are. I think this is going to be an unbelievable conference finals. I don't look at any of these teams as, well, it's probably going to be a quick out there.
Fraudulent? No, look, there are many years where we don't get a fantastic conference final because there's some team that goes on a miracle run and then gets their doors blown off. I'm not saying it's impossible for there to be a short series, because I don't think that that's the case. You see frequently teams get themselves into trouble even in close games. But this is the best collection of 4 teams that we've had in a conference final. I think the best 4 teams remaining that we've seen in some time, that I can remember at least.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hell of a conference final in both the West and East. We'll continue our previews of it tomorrow and throughout the week on the show. Game 1 in the East goes tomorrow night between the Rangers and Panthers. Game 1 out West goes on Thursday from Dallas. Frank, we're going to slowly start mixing in a little bit more offseason talk on this show now that we're down to just 4 teams remaining in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And today I want to bring back the smoke or fire segment. Just a reminder, you got 3 options to what I present you, Frank. You can say there is smoke, there is fire, or this is a false alarm. And I've asked you this one in the past, actually. I'm curious for an update. The Matvei Michkov situation, the rumblings about him maybe getting out of his contract in the KHL and coming over to the NHL earlier than expected. Smoke, fire, false alarm.
Oh, that's a 4-alarm fire. I mean, that thing is billowing out smoke. The tough part is it's tough to kind of waft through all that smoke because the Philadelphia Flyers can't say anything. They actually can't even communicate directly with SKA St. Petersburg to negotiate a buyout of that contract. It has to be a third party, namely Michkov's agent. It has to be, or I should say agents, plural. It should, or must, not should, must be paid for if it is by Matvei Michkov or his agent. That money cannot come from the Philadelphia Flyers. And then the next part of this equation is the Flyers aren't going to say boo in between now and then because they are so afraid of having this go sideways. All they want to do is get their hands on Matvei Michkov, get him to North America, and sign him to a contract as quick as possible because not only do they want to help develop this kid, but they just went through a really tough situation with Ivan Fedotov, their 6'7" goaltender, who on his way after signing a contract with the Flyers was picked up by the Russian military and forced into 1 year of conscription service and banished to Siberia for a year. And then after the back end of that, he then was forced to sign another contract, even though he had an enforceable contract with the Flyers to play one more season for CSKA Moscow, the Red Army team. Until the Flyers can actually pick Matvei Michkov up at the airport and then get his signature on a piece of paper, I don't think we're going to hear much official, but the reason why it's a fire and not smoke is because SKA St. Petersburg is sending up plenty of smoke signals through the media that they are down and ready to negotiate. Gotta love Russia.
Oh man, and that's the best part. Like you said, you won't feel confident if you're a Flyers fan until you see him on North American soil physically. Second one I got for you, Frank, is about Linus Ullmark. He came out and said he's got 1 more year on his deal. His no trade list is a no trade list for a reason. Ullmark's availability this summer, and the Bruins, I should word it this way, the Bruins' ability to trade Ullmark, smoke, fire, or is it a false alarm?
Oh, that's fire. I mean, when you have a 16-team no trade, that's half the league you can send him to, or 15 teams. He can block slightly more than half because the Bruins are one of them. So I personally, this is my own personal opinion first, is that you don't bleep with happy. They've got a team that really runs on the back of its tandem and not just one guy. Even though we know Swayman is the guy and the guy for the future, they exceeded expectations by 10 points this year because of how well their goaltending tandem played, not just one guy. And they almost split it down the middle. You need 2 goalies in today's NHL system. The problem is there's plenty of teams that don't have one. And therein lies the rub, in which they've got limited cap space, they have limited assets, and Ullmark is a really attractive option. So I'd be surprised if we get to the other side of Canada Day on July 1st and Linus Ullmark is still a member of the Boston Bruins, given what we know about their willingness and or want to move him when it came to the trade deadline, him blocking that trade to LA with that no move, no trade. But stranger things have happened.
All right, let's move along to our 4th topic for the day. Like I said, we're going to continue our summer look-aheads for every team around the league, and we're going to start with the teams that made the playoffs, and we're going to go in order in which they were eliminated. So today, first up is the Washington Capitals, who were swept in round 1 by the New York Rangers. And Frank, what an interesting team to take a look at heading into the summer, because they don't have a lot of key free agents. I mean, McMichael is an RFA. You're going to bring him back. Max Pacioretty, the point I'm making, they have a roster that, barely made the playoffs, is getting older in a lot of key areas, and yet a lot of these guys are signed and they don't have a ton of cap space right now. What's the plan this summer in Washington?
Well, the plan is to continue to compete. I think they're also now trying to do it in a really manageable way. They're not going to be going out and trading young pieces to try and prop up this team in the short term. Brian McClellan was really clear at the trade deadline that they're looking toward the future. And the fact that they were able to make a late season push in a historically low bar in the Eastern Conference and make the playoffs in Spencer Carberry's first year was not only a tip of the cap to the job that Carberry did, but really to how much that team competed in the second half of the year. They were left for dead at the deadline, and that was only in March. That team really willed itself toward the postseason. And it also gave us some proof that it's not necessarily over yet for Alex Ovechkin. We know he's going to get the goal scoring record. The question in the chase is just simply when. How long will it take? In the meantime, can you continue to hang in the mix? Because they've essentially made a promise to Alex Ovechkin that they're going to try and do that as long as they can. And they really need to, in my opinion, reshape their defense core. John Carlson coming back after the significant period of time that he missed one season prior was hugely important for that team. He transformed their ability to compete based on the way he plays, but they need more. They need more depth. They need more Rasmus Sandin type players that fit that age profile and that scheme to really help turn over this roster a bit more. And that's where, even for a team that at times struggled to score, I think they should focus their attention. And if you want to talk trade chips, is there any chance you could potentially find someone to take on Darcy Kemper in that contract after Charlie Lindgren stole the show and stole the crease?
Well, there are teams who will be looking for goaltending, and it's interesting to see Kemper, Allmark, Markstrom, a lot of fascinating names could be on the move this summer. Let's move along and get to our big segment. It's the All 32 with Jeff Paterson. The All 32 is fueled by Booster Juice. Download the new Booster Rewards app today to start earning berry points for delicious and nutritious smoothies, drinks, and food that will power you through the day. Jeff Paterson from Rink-Wide Vancouver and Canucks Army joins us on the heels of their elimination last night, Jeff. And, I'm sure Canucks fans are not exactly in a great mood today, but when you look at this season as a whole, it's still fair to label it as a success, right?
Oh, without a doubt. And as Frank can tell you, because he spent the better part of the month here, a little gray and gloomy with the weather here today. And I think that probably sums up the mood of the city too. But what a run. 9 years since fans here in Vancouver had the chance to consume playoff hockey, to buy tickets and see playoff games at Rogers Arena. And the fans were a massive part of the last month here, the way that they showed up and supported this team. And they brought the fun back. And it really, it sort of underscored for me just how much this city, this market missed playoff hockey. And, every spring watching as everybody else was having fun and the Canucks were left on the sideline. But, 50 wins, 109 points, the division title, and the right to host a Game 7 in the second round of the playoffs on home ice for a team that, look, by the president's own words, Jim Rutherford on the eve of training camp said everything had to go right for this team just to be a playoff team. And yet they overachieved. They came out of the gates on fire. A big part of that was the way that they, took care of the Oilers in those 3 early games. And that was part of the story of winning the division and having this Game 7. And so, look, it'll take a couple of days because I think ultimately this was a missed opportunity. Connor McDavid was probably the 4th best Oiler in this series. He was the 4th most productive Oiler. He had a couple of big games, but the Canucks did a pretty good job of keeping him in check and holding him to the outside. It wasn't like McDavid went all world. Draisaitl did. He was incredible, but Evan Bouchard and the Nuge rose to the occasion. But, it felt to me, you take a 3-2 series lead and then the approach to both games 6 and 7. You got the Oilers on the ropes and 4 shots on goal in the first period in Edmonton in Game 6. And they outdid themselves with 2 shots on goal in the first period in Game 7. And look, this is a team that led the National Hockey League in the regular season, opening the scoring. 53 of their 82 games of the season, they opened the scoring. And their blueprint to success was get a lead, build on it, and then dictate the way the game is going to play and defend the way that you want to and see it through. They opened the scoring once in the 7 games against the Oilers. They were so passive early. They were chasing games far too often. And this, again, Frank has been here every step of the way. That power play was putrid. Let's be honest. And it wasn't just the first period last night with the double-minded Ryan McLeod. The other night, they had Draisaitl and McDavid took first period penalties, and the Canucks didn't generate a single shot. Evander Kane earlier in the series took a double minor. Canucks did nothing with that. They had a 5-on-3 at one point in this series. And in a series that was this tight, guys, the Oilers ended up scoring twice as many power play goals as the Canucks. Now, maybe that's not a surprise. The bigger surprise is the Canucks had more power plays than the Edmonton Oilers over 7 games and scored just 3 times. And what a power play goal might have meant in Game 6 or Game 7. So just felt like a real opportunity lost. The Oilers were on the ropes, and the Canucks just didn't do enough to deliver the knockout punch.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think missing their kill shot in Game 6 in Edmonton with the opportunity to put away the Oilers, they just opened the door. But Jeff, I want to spin it forward a bit because we're always looking toward what's next. And there's a million questions for the Canucks to answer this summer. Are you keeping Zadorov or Hronek? Can you find a way to keep Lindholm? Do you pay Dakota Joshua? There's a million things to talk about. An overarching question for you is there a path for the Canucks to be better next season than they were this year? I have a hard time coming up with one myself, but what do you think?
You know, it's funny. Not even 24 hours, obviously, but slept on the events of last night and just thinking about this team coming out of the bubble was one of the sexy teams in the National Hockey League. Paterson and Hughes and Horvat at the time and Besser and JT Miller was new to this group. And look, they pushed Vegas to 7 games there and sort of made some waves, and Thatcher Demko got the nickname Bubble Demko. And there was this belief that this was just the start of something. And then in the midst of the pandemic and some just brutal organizational cost-cutting decisions, Chris Tanev and Jacob Markstrom and Troy Stetcher and Tyler Toffoli all walked out the door in the same weekend in free agency, and it set this group back a ton. So there was that same sort of excitement coming out of the bubble playoffs, even though people weren't there to see it. And in the blink of an eye, it just set them back years that they are finally sort of getting over. Now, new management group here. So I'm really fascinated to see how they handle this situation. But to your point, Frank, yeah, the management group did a nice job of bringing in a lot of players on short deals, 1-year contracts, got them to come in here, buy into what Rick Tocchet was selling, and proof was in the pudding. Again, they won the division, 50 wins, have the 13 games here in the playoffs. But, a lot of guys overachieved or exceeded expectations like the team did. And with that comes, a running parking meter or price. The fares go up for all these guys. And so I think some of these guys are going to have priced themselves out of Vancouver. They've probably attracted some interest around the National Hockey League, whether it's Zadorov, whether it's Dakota Joshua and the season that he had. The Hronek one is going to be fascinating because, he was incredible up till Christmas. And then his production and his performance really fell off a cliff. And most of that time attached to Quinn Hughes. It wasn't like he moved away from Quinn Hughes. And so, the Canucks, they're going to have to do some internal soul searching here to figure out what went wrong. Obviously, Elias Pettersson down the stretch. Quinn Hughes in the playoffs was not nearly the dynamic force that he was with 92 points and the probable Norris winner. He got outperformed and outproduced big time by Evan Bouchard at the end. And part of the power play that I mentioned, that was Quinn Hughes' bread and butter. Forget 5-on-5. He could have been a difference maker on the power play, but that just didn't happen. So, they got to figure out about the guys that they have under contract and how they, what do they take away from this playoff? What are their learnings there? How do they get better because of what they've just gone through? And then it's about surrounding them with the right kind of pieces here. They've got some numbers that are coming off the books, so they're going to have some money to spend, but it's about spending it wisely, obviously, for the Canucks and every team in the National Hockey League. So I'm with you. I think it is going to be a challenge to build on, now maybe they don't have to build on the regular season, but it is, can they build on what they accomplished here playing 13 games? If they ran out of gas at the end of 2 rounds, then that tells you something as well, because ultimately they only had 7 wins in the playoffs when you need 16 to hoist the Stanley Cup. So they traveled and covered a lot of ground this year, but there's still a lot of work left to be done for this Vancouver Canuck organization.
Yeah, and full perspective, too. They also did it without their Vezina Trophy finalist goaltender, and in Game 7 without their leading playoff goal scorer and an Oiler killer and Brock Besser. Quickly, Jeff, I hate the cheesy buzzword of culture. But Rick Tocchet, I think he summed it up perfectly last night where he said they put a lot of pride back in that crest and this city. Just the power of what Rick Tocchet has built culture-wise for this organization. Vancouver's always been an amazing place to live and play, but now this is going to be a coach that players want to play for, no?
Yeah, I think without a doubt. And I think instant respect with his playing credentials and now the year and a half that he's had behind the bench here.
And his full staff, by the way.
And I was going to say, he's so quick to point out, Adam Foote probably doesn't get the credit that he deserves necessarily. I think the Canucks were really fortunate that he was available when Rick Tocchet came in as a head coach. Sometimes midseason coaching changes, you're stuck with the staff that you've got, or, the best candidates aren't necessarily available. And Adam Foote wanted to get back into coaching. And I think that he has been almost as important. This is a team that just couldn't defend. I mean, they were brutal at the end of the Travis Green run under Bruce Boudreau. Bruce was fun and they scored some goals, but again, they couldn't defend. And it became a bit of a punchline here almost because Rick Tocchet talks so much about structure, right? Wall work and board battles. He has all of his buzzwords. But at the end of the day, structure saw the Canucks through. I mean, they defended. I think they fell into a trap a little bit of thinking that they could defend to the bitter end, but ultimately you can't win games 0-0. You do have to score some goals. And, as I said earlier, they kept falling behind and chasing games, but they had this belief that even when they were down, they were never out, and they showed it last night. So, Rick Tocchet, Coach of the Year, I think is tomorrow, isn't it? I'm expecting that he's going to be the Coach of the Year, and he did some incredible work, but he can't rest on his laurels either. I think there were some flaws exposed here over the course of the playoffs that he's going to have to look in the mirror and try and figure out. They went all year without a power play coach. They try to do things by committee, and I do wonder if that's an area where they're going to have to find somebody and task him with. There's just too much on a coach's plate in today's NHL, and Rick Tocchet took on a lot of the power play. He's got a lot of experience as a player, but he's got some good people around him as well, and I just wonder if that's something that they look at in putting the power play in a portfolio of somebody other than the head coach.
The All 32 powered by Booster Juice. J-Pat, appreciate your time. Enjoyed your coverage during the series. Thanks for doing this.
Frank, we're going to miss you. You were sort of feeling like family out here.
I know. It's been a great month, but rest up. We got a lot to talk about, J-Pat.
We'll see you at the draft.
Hashtag AskDFO. Our daily Faceoff inbox question is brought to you by Douglas Mattresses. You can order today at douglas.ca/DFO. Douglas Mattresses, handcrafted in Canada, ensuring the highest quality materials and fastest delivery to you. Frank, your daily Faceoff inbox question is this: should Canadian fans rally behind the Oilers?
Yeah, because they're actually truly Canada's team. Wrote a story today on dailyfaceoff.com about the fact that no team in the salary cap era has gotten to the conference final, the Final Four, with more Canadians on the roster than these Edmonton Oilers. So there's this talk every year. If you're a Flames fan, if you're a Canucks fan, if you're a Jets fan, will you set aside your allegiances to cheer for the last team standing, to root and pull for someone to end Canada's 30-year cup drought and prevent it from getting to 31? Well, the Oilers make a pretty good case for that. 16 out of 20 players in the lineup last night Canadian, and it's even crazier when you consider that Leon Draisaitl played his junior hockey in Prince Albert and Kelowna, and Derek Ryan, the American on the roster, played for the University of Alberta Golden Bears, where Tyler cut his teeth calling play-by-play. So it's an amazing number. It's an amazing story. Talked to Ken Holland after the game last night, and he said, look, we went out to try and acquire some grease and grit. The fact that they just happened to have Canadian passports, he said that wasn't something we were intentionally doing, just trying to get players that help you win. So love that story. And after talking to some of the Oilers guys yesterday, Connor McDavid, when I asked him the question, of course, he kind of shrugged it off, but he said, just happy that we are one of the last teams playing because that means we still got a shot.
I still am the play-by-play voice of the Alberta Golden Bears, Frank. Come on now.
I said you cut your teeth, though. That's really how you burst onto the broadcasting scene.
Shout out Bob Stauffer as well for the Golden Bears references. Let's move along to our betting segment. Bet365 is the largest sports betting platform globally. Open an account with Bet365 today and use the promo code DAILY365 to get in on a huge range of markets. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Frank, we are taking a peek at the Conn Smythe odds since there are no games tonight in the NHL. Jake Ottinger leads the way. Connor McDavid, Igor Shesterkin, Alexander Barkov round out the top 4. But I want you, rapid fire style, give me each team's MVP through 2 rounds of the playoffs.
Leon Draisaitl, Wyatt Johnson, Matthew Tkachuk, and the Rangers is the hardest one.
It is.
I'm going to say Chris Kreider just because of the recency bias with the hat trick, but man, you could make a great case for Trocheck or Zibanejad.
Yeah, the Rangers have been doing it by committee, as have pretty much all these teams at this point, but an interesting Conn Smythe race there, courtesy of Bet365. Let's wrap up the show with a little bit of garbage time. It is brought to you by Wendy's. They use fresh, never frozen Canadian beef in all their burgers. Download the Wendy's app today to check out the latest deals. Frank, I wanted to get to this locker room cleanout day. I always bring something a little spicy in every market. Let's run this clip of Canes GM Don Waddell.
You don't negotiate with parents, but Martin Necas's dad had some comments about him wanting to be traded and maybe not being happy. He wasn't on the top power play unit, all of that. Again, I know you don't deal with parents, you deal with agents and players, but what do you think of that? And, maybe his future, obviously, he's a RFA, and that's a...
Well, first, you're telling me something that I don't know, because I could care less what everybody says, and regardless if it's an agent or parent. I love the parents, but I want to talk to the parents about their kids, not about their contract. So I don't have enough toes and fingers to tell you how many players have walked in my office say about being traded. And we're not opposed to always trading players, but you also got to look at the value of what you're getting back for players. And Marty's an exceptionally skilled guy that you're just not going to give up on, that's for sure. So we'll deal with it as the summer progresses. Say hi to his dad for me.
First off, Frank, the Don Waddell liners in that and ending it with say hi to his dad for me are absolutely incredible. So your thoughts on that? And also, let me give you a bonus: smoke, fire, false alarm on Marty Necas as a Cane.
False alarm. They're not moving him. You can't possibly get equal value, and he's such a talented player. You're taking a step backward if you move him. And second, I love Don Waddell so much. Exactly as you see him in that press conference is exactly what he's like to sit across from and have a cocktail with. Just one of a kind. And he doesn't make excuses. There's no fluff. There's no lying. Just, this is what it is. We're in the entertainment business. Let's have fun and let's talk about it, because that's how he views it. And he's been through a lot, seen a lot. The only GM that the Atlanta Thrashers ever knew, and has done a great job in Carolina with some interesting pressure points and everything going on. So been one of the most consistent teams in hockey. I'm interested to see how they redo things.
Yeah, it will be a fascinating summer out in Raleigh. That's a wrap on the show. Just a reminder, if you head to dailyfaceoff.com, you can take part in the playoff parlay challenge. It'll still be going through the conference finals. Hit the top right corner where it says DFO games. Get in for your chance to win some gift cards, maybe a jersey of your favorite team, some nation gear as well. Dailyfaceoff.com, click on DFO games. That is a wrap on today's edition of Daily Faceoff Live. Frank Seravalli, enjoy your flight back home. You're finally getting a chance to head home.
It's only 2,500 miles away. I mean, who's counting?
Yeah, that'll be a wrap on today's show. Myself, Colby Cohen, back at things tomorrow. We'll see you then, noon Eastern.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Face Off Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.